Right now, somewhere in your city, someone is doing the math again. Not the retirement math, not the investment math, the other math. The one you do at 11 p.m. on a Sunday. Rent is due Thursday, the car payment cleared yesterday, and there is exactly enough left to get to Friday if nothing goes wrong. That math has a name. And if you've been doing it for more than a few months, you already know what it feels like. But what happens if you do it for 20 years? Not as a crisis, not as a rock bottom, as a lifestyle. I've talked to people who lived this way for 2 decades. Steady job, steady paycheck, steady fear. And the thing nobody tells you is that the money isn't even the worst part. The money is just the surface. What happens underneath, to your body, your decisions, your sense of who you are, that's what this is actually about. This is not a story about someone who failed. This is a story about what the system does to someone who plays by the rules for 20 years and still can't get ahead. By the end, you'll understand every level of it, how it starts, how it slowly becomes invisible, and what the exit actually looks like. Because there is one. There's always one. I've stood on every level of this. Let me save you 10 years. Level 1. You are 23, maybe 25. You have your first real job. Direct deposit hits every other Friday, and for about 72 hours, you feel fine. You pay the rent, you buy groceries, you put gas in the car. And then, by Wednesday of the following week, you are watching the account like it's a patient in critical condition. But here's what you tell yourself. This is just the beginning. You're new. You're starting out. Everyone starts out like this. You'll get a raise. You'll find a better job. You'll figure it out. The word temporary does a lot of heavy lifting in year 1. And to be fair, it might be temporary. Plenty of people climb out in year 2 or 3. But some don't. Not because they're lazy, not because they're bad with money. Because the gap between what it costs to exist and what entry-level work pays is just wide enough that there's almost nothing left to work with. Emotionally, year 1 is survivable because of hope. You haven't lost it yet. The future still feels like a different country you're about to visit. You don't question whether you're behind. You just assume you're early. The account hits $11 on a Thursday, and you laugh it off. You're not worried yet. That comes later. That's the rule at this level. Hope is the shock absorber. It doesn't fix anything, it just makes the road feel smoother than it is. You get the raise. It's 3%. Maybe 4%. And for about 6 weeks, the breathing room is real. You go out to dinner once without calculating the tip 3 times. You buy a piece of furniture. You feel like things are moving. Then the rent goes up. The insurance renews. Your phone plan gets a surcharge you didn't notice until month 3. And suddenly, you are doing the same math again. Different numbers, same equation. This is the moment most people don't recognize as a turning point, because it doesn't feel like one. It feels like a minor setback, a temporary delay. You'll get another raise, the numbers will catch up eventually. But here's what's actually happening underneath the surface. Your brain is learning. Not consciously, below that. It is learning that the Friday relief never lasts past Wednesday, that money arriving is just a signal that money is about to leave, that financial safety is something that happens to other people. Psychologists call this kind of low-grade chronic financial stress a specific kind of cognitive load. It takes up space. Not all the space you're still functional, still showing up, still performing at work, but part of your processing power is always running that background calculation. By year 3, you stop noticing it. That's not peace, that's adaptation. You start making small adjustments that feel like choices, but are really just compression. You don't go to the wedding in another city. You don't renew the gym membership. You stop ordering the thing you actually want and order the second thing instead. Nobody around you knows. You look fine. You are fine by the technical definition. That's the rule at this level. The loop doesn't announce itself as permanent. It just quietly becomes the architecture of your life. Year 5. You're in your late 20s, maybe early 30s, and something has changed that is harder to name than a bank balance. You no longer think about money the way other people seem to. Your coworker talks about opening a brokerage account, and your first thought isn't how, it's with what. Your friend mentions they're saving for a house down payment, and you nod, but inside there's a quiet calculation happening. How many years would that take you? The number comes back too large to sit with, so you let it go. You're not hopeless. But hope has shifted. It's narrower now, more local. You're hoping for Friday. You're hoping the check engine light doesn't mean anything serious. You're hoping the next performance review lands a little higher. The big future, the retirement, the house, the options, that started to feel like a different channel that other people are watching, not yours. This is the identity shift, and it's the most dangerous thing that happens in these years because it's invisible. You start to locate yourself differently in the financial world, not as someone who is temporarily at the bottom of the ladder, but as someone who simply lives here. It becomes part of how you explain yourself, even internally. I'm not really a money person. I don't think about that stuff. That's for people who know about investing. The money story you tell yourself stops being a chapter and starts being a character trait, and the people around you begin to sort. The ones climbing, you see them less, not dramatically, just naturally. Their weekends cost more. Their conversations drift toward things you're not doing. The sorting is gentle, and nobody acknowledges it, but it is happening. That's the rule at this level. When financial stress becomes part of your identity, it stops feeling like a problem to solve and starts feeling like a fact about who you are. That's the hardest cage to see. Somewhere around year 8, the stress stops being just financial. You sleep a little worse. Not badly, not insomnia, not crisis sleep, just slightly worse. You wake up earlier than you want to, and the first thought before you're fully conscious is a number, or a due date, or a question mark. The tension in your shoulders that used to come and go is now just there. You stop noticing it because noticing it doesn't help. This is what long-term, low-grade financial stress does to a body. It keeps the nervous system in a state of low alert, not panic, is acute panic, ends. This is something quieter and more persistent. Your cortisol levels run a little high over a long enough period that it stops feeling like stress and starts feeling like you. You're more irritable than you used to be, but only at home where it's safe to be. You're shorter with the people closest to you, and you don't always know why. You're also making decisions differently. Research on scarcity, on what chronic financial pressure does to decision-making, shows something counterintuitive. When your mind is focused on an immediate financial threat, it borrows attention from long-term thinking. Not because you're not smart, because the brain under resource pressure prioritizes now over later, every time. So the retirement contribution keeps getting pushed to when things settle down. The dentist appointment keeps getting rescheduled because the copay isn't catastrophic, but it isn't nothing. The thing that would cost $100 today, but save $500 next year, keeps getting deferred. You're not making bad decisions, you're making constrained decisions. That is a completely different thing, and almost nobody treats them as different. That's the rule at this level. The body doesn't distinguish between financial stress and physical threat. 20 years of financial anxiety is 20 years of your nervous system working overtime. You've made it to your mid-30s. You're experienced. You're reliable. You know how to function. And then the car needs $800. This is the emergency tax. And at this level, after more than a decade of paycheck-to-paycheck living, You have almost certainly paid it multiple times. The transmission. The hospital visit with the high deductible. The week you had to fly home suddenly. The deposit for the new apartment when the old landlord raised the rent beyond reach. Every one of these events, which are just life, just ordinary life, hits someone with savings like a speed bump. It hits you like a wall. Not a catastrophic wall. You handle it. You always handle it. But handling it means one of three things. You put it on the card you borrow from someone you love, or you spend the next 6 weeks rebuilding what the emergency took. And while you're rebuilding, you are one more emergency away from starting over again. The credit card balance has become a familiar roommate. You know its number. You've had a relationship with it for years. You pay it down, and then something happens, and you build it back up. It never quite reaches zero. Not for long. This is the mechanics of how wealth doesn't accumulate. Not because you're spending foolishly, because every time there's a small surplus, life finds a way to collect it. The margin is simply too thin. What this does psychologically is something specific. It makes you risk-averse in exactly the wrong direction. You become afraid of things costing money, so you defer maintenance on the car, on your health, on the apartment, and the deferred maintenance becomes a larger emergency later. You're not being irrational. You're responding correctly to your constraints. But the constraints are compounding. That's the rule at this level. Without an emergency fund, every emergency is paid for with interest, financial and emotional. You're in your late 30s, and the money has started reaching into places you didn't expect it to reach. If you have a partner, you've had the conversation. More than once. Maybe more than 100 times in 100 different forms. Who spent what? Why the account is lower than it should be? Why the plan you made last month didn't survive contact with reality? Financial stress is consistently cited among the leading sources of relationship friction, not because money is more important than love, but because money is daily, and daily friction compounds faster than annual crises. Some relationships survive this. Some bend in ways that don't fully heal. What's harder to talk about is what paycheck-to-paycheck living does to the relationships outside the household. The friend group that's moved on to a different tier of life, the dinners you keep finding reasons to skip, the trips you haven't been on in years. There's a specific loneliness in having the same conversations, but living in quietly different economic realities. You learn to translate, to make your situation sound more like a choice than a constraint. I'm just not really into big trips right now. We're keeping things simple this year. We're saving. That last one is technically true. You are saving. $200 a month, which felt like progress until you did the math on what $200 a month gets you at this stage of life. And if you have children, if you're raising kids inside a paycheck-to-paycheck structure, there's a whole separate layer. You're managing not just your own financial anxiety, but a performance of normalcy for them. Making sure they don't feel the tightness. Making sure the school trip gets paid for, even if it means that month is harder. Protecting them from the math you do every Sunday night. The weight of that performance is enormous and invisible. And almost nobody acknowledges it. That's the rule at this level. Financial stress doesn't stay in the bank account. It migrates into relationships, into silence, into the things you perform instead of feel. You're in your early 40s, and you've just done a calculation you've been avoiding. You looked at what you have saved for retirement, and then you looked at what you would need. And then you sat with that gap for a long time in the quiet, because the math doesn't resolve no matter how many times you run it. This is the reckoning. It hits differently at 42 than it would have at 32, because at 32 there was still a story about time. At 42, the story about time is shorter, and you know it. This is the level where some people spiral and some people pivot. The spiral looks like paralysis. The gap is so large that starting feels pointless, so you don't start. You keep doing what you've been doing because the alternative requires acknowledging that the last 17 years happened the way they happened. But here's what I want you to hear if you're at this level right now. The math has changed, but it hasn't run out. At 42, with 23 years until the conventional retirement age, compound growth still works. It works less dramatically than it would have at 22, but it works. And more importantly, the thing that blocked you for 17 years, the thing that kept the margin too thin to invest, the thing that made every surplus disappear before it could grow, that thing can be named now. And naming it is the beginning of the exit. Not everyone pivots here, but everyone could. That's the rule at this level. The reckoning is not the end of the road, it's the first honest map you've had. And a real map, even a late one, is worth more than no map at all. Year 20. You're thinking about the number at the beginning of this, the one from the Sunday night math. You've been doing that math for 20 years now, 240 months, roughly 1,000 Sundays. Here's what's actually left after 20 years of paycheck to paycheck living. Not just the financial inventory, though, that's real, and we need to look at it, but the full inventory. Financially, you have less saved than you planned, probably significantly less. The retirement account exists, but it's behind. The emergency fund is thin or absent. The credit card balance has a history. The net worth number, if you sat down and calculated it honestly, would land below where you hope to be at this age. That is real. I'm not going to soften it. But here's what else is real. You have 20 years of experience living without margin. That sounds like damage. It is damage. But it's also a specific and underestimated kind of knowledge. You know how to survive. You know how to prioritize under pressure. You know exactly what your actual fixed costs are because you've negotiated with them every month for 2 decades. You know what matters and what doesn't because luxury stripped itself out of your life a long time ago. You also know something about yourself that people who've never been financially stressed don't know about themselves. You know what you're made of when things are hard. You've been tested, quietly, consistently, and you're still here. The question at year 20 is not, how did this happen to me? The question is, what do I do with the next 20? Because here is what the research and the lived experience and every person I've talked to who found the exit actually agrees on. The path out of paycheck to paycheck living is not dramatic. It doesn't require a windfall. It doesn't require a career reinvention, though that can help. It requires one thing. The margin has to change before anything else can, even by a small amount. Even by $50 a month, if that's what's available. Because what $50 a month does if you protect it, if you treat it as untouchable before you see it automated, before Friday arrives, is not build wealth immediately. What it does is break the loop. It creates a category of money that isn't consumed by the immediate, and that category, however small, changes the psychology. It starts the process of moving from I spend what I earn to I earn more than I spend. Those are different identities. The second one compounds differently. The debt that's been accumulating, that card balance that has never hit zero, that gets addressed with a specific strategy rather than willpower alone. The smallest balance first, or the highest interest first. It doesn't matter which school of thought you follow, as long as you follow one consistently, in a way the current cash flow can actually support. The retirement account, even late, even small, gets opened or increased. Because 23 years of compound growth on something is better than 23 years of compound growth on nothing. And the identity, the story that formed somewhere around year 5 that said, you're just not a money person, that you Don't think about that stuff. That story has to be looked at directly, because it isn't true. You thought about money every week for 20 years. You are in fact one of the most money-aware people alive. You've just been thinking about it under emergency conditions rather than strategic ones. That shifts when the emergency conditions shift even slightly. Remember the $11 Thursday from year one? You laughed it off then. You had hope you hadn't earned yet. Young, unearned hope that the future was going to sort itself out. You don't have that hope anymore. But you have something better. You have specific knowledge. You know exactly what the loop costs. You know exactly where the holes are. And you've survived every single emergency the last 20 years threw at you. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, the foundation of everything that comes next. That's the rule at this level. 20 years of paycheck to paycheck doesn't define the next 20. It defines what you now know, which is more than most people who've never had to learn it. You're not behind. You're between levels. The person who's been doing the Sunday night math for 20 years isn't someone who failed the test. They're someone who's been taking a test nobody told them about, in conditions nobody acknowledged, without the tools the test actually requires. The exit isn't a miracle. It's a margin. A small, protected, automated margin that grows slowly in a direction the loop never allowed. $50. 100. Whatever the gap between this Friday and the edge of zero actually permits, you protect it before you see it. You don't negotiate with it on Wednesday. You let it sit there, untouched, doing the quiet work that 2 decades of survival couldn't do, not because you weren't trying, but because trying requires something to work with. I've stood on every level of this. The Sunday night math, the finger over the sell button, the moment the reckoning arrives and you sit with a number that doesn't add up. And I've stood on the other side of it. The exit doesn't announce itself. It starts with 1 month where you didn't break the rule, then 2, then 6. Then you look up and the account has a number in it that's never been there before, and you didn't feel yourself saving it because you set it up to happen without you. That morning comes. It comes for people who started at 42. It comes for people who spent 15 years building the loop before they named it. It comes slower than it should, given what you put in. But it comes. You're closer to the next level than you think. Now go stand on it. For educational and storytelling purposes only, not financial advice, investing involves risk, including loss of principal. Do your own research or consult a licensed advisor.